Hey guys, welcome back to the Second Time Lucky mining channel. In today's video we're going to have a look at the Flux Collateral node halving, more specifically the dates that has changed. We'll quickly do a recap of what the requirements are. We're going to have a look at some of the options that's available, some of the tools that's available to make sure that you can meet those requirements. We'll talk about the hypothetical rewards, that's probably the piece that most people are interested in, and then I'll share my experience testing it so far. If you like this type of content, smash the like button and maybe consider subscribing to the channel. It will help me out a great deal. But enough of plugging my own channel, let's jump into the details. Okay, so let's have a look at the proposed dates that has slightly changed. So if you haven't watched my previous video, I'll leave a link in the video description and tag it at the top. But the transition or the collateral halving was supposed to start on the 1st of March. However, that has changed slightly. So the new and revised dates at this specific point in time is about a week away. So starting with the cumulus nodes, that transition starts on the 12th of March up until the 26th of March. For Nimbus, that starts at the 19th of March up until the 4th of April. And for the big boy Stratus, that starts on the 27th of March up until the 10th of April. So those are the new revised dates. Okay, so besides the collateral that has changed, the other big change would be the requirements for the various different nodes from a hardware specification point of view. So a quick recap of that. So for Cumulus, you need 2 cores, 4 threads, 8 GB of RAM, 220 GB of SSD storage. That storage needs to be 180 DWS or disk write speed. Then on the CPU side, you need to score 240 events per second. On the network side, you need 25 megabits. Specifically for Nimbus, what we would need is 4 cores, 8 threads, 32 gigabytes of RAM, so that's the big change there. You would need 440 gigabytes of SSD storage, and from a speed perspective, that storage would be the same speed as Cumulus at 180 DWS, and then the CPU score needs to be 640 events per second. The network bandwidth also doubled to 50 megabits. On the Stratus node, that would be the big boy. You would need 8 cores, 16 threads, 64 gigabytes of RAM, and then a massive 880 gigabytes of SSD storage. The big change here is actually the speed of the storage, so that would be 400 DWS. And then on the CPU side, you would need 1520 events per second on the CPU side. And then the network bandwidth again has doubled from Nimbus, so now you would need 100. Okay, so now that we know what the minimum system requirements are, let's have a look at some of the options. The first one, being probably the most important one, is standing up hardware yourself, and that would really help the decentralized drive. So that's the one that we would always encourage people to go and do, and that's actually what I'm doing. Within that option, there's various different things that you can do. The first one being you can use an old computer or build up a new computer to meet the requirements. There's actually a good video that Walter put out from the Flux team that you can have a look at, and I'll leave a link in the video description and tag it at the top. The other one being a mini PC. Again, Walter did another video specifically on that, so I'll leave a link in the video description and tag it at the top so you guys can have a look at that. There are also options around a Raspberry Pi, and that's actually what I did. And again, Flux Labs released a video specifically on that, so I'll leave a link in the video description for that. Another option would be NVIDIA Jetsons. Again, Walter did a video on that. So as you're probably hearing now, there's a lot of videos encouraging people to stand up their own hardware, and that's really what Flux is trying to achieve. So I would definitely encourage you guys to go and have a look at that. So the other option is a VPS, and it's obviously not as good from a decentralization point of view, but it is at least an option that is available for people that don't want to deal with the hassle of their own hardware. Within that option, Flux actually has got a shared Excel sheet with various different providers and costs within the different tiers that you can have a look at least from a price comparison point of view. Personally, I have tested 2, so I've tested Contabo and I've tested SSD or Strashmore. with mixed results using Contabo. Obviously my benchmark results failed the first time and I had to go back to Contabo to increase the speeds of the SSD, but after a little bit of back and forth managed to work, and it's been up at least for a week on the testnet, so I'm super happy about that. The other one that I tested was SSD nodes or Strashmore. That was not so successful, so I don't know if that's specifically to the region where I am, but I didn't manage to get that working, and subsequently I asked for a refund. So now that we know what the new dates are, the requirements and some of the options, let's have a look at the rewards or potential rewards and the tools that is available to us. And for that, I'm going to jump into the computer. So let's have a look at some of the tools that are available for us for support. The first one being the official Discord for Flux, and I will definitely encourage you guys to do that. If you would like to test either your own machine or your VPS, there's a specific section here for the testnet. The first most important thing here is the instructions. So it's detailed instructions of exactly what you need to do. There's a section where you would request your test coins, where you would be able to paste your benchmarks. And again, we'll have a look at some of the results of people's benchmarks. And then again, if you've got any issues, you can go to the support section on this side to post your issue. And then as you can see here, Walter is helping a lot of people. Now that we know where to get official help from Flux in their Discords, let's have a look at some of the other tools that is available. The first one being the recent partnership between Flux and Seed. And Seed is a hardware provider. So as you can see here, they've got now a dedicated page specifically around some of the hardware that they can supply that would meet the minimum specifications for the various different nodes. So as you can see here, it's nicely labeled where they've got a device that would meet, let's say, the Cumulus node structure. So it's a nice little place in case you want to go and directly buy hardware that would meet the specific requirement. Again, this doesn't stop you from buying your own hardware somewhere else. So you obviously definitely can do that. Here is just a recent partnership with Seed and Flux, just making it a little bit easier. I know that Flux and Seed are working together also to allow, or that some of these devices come pre-shipped with certain of the software that you would need to stand up a node. But as far as I understand, that is not yet working, or it's not active at this specific point in time. Again, this is just one option that is available. Now, if you don't want to buy a device from Seed, you can obviously use your own computer or build your own computer. And for that, there is actually a Google Sheet that Flux has been putting together with the community results, doing benchmarks of the various different computers that they have been trying for the various different node structures. And this is sort of what it looks like. And I'll leave a link in the video description, but the README page is pretty important. Here you can get a view around, the different nodes, the specifications. Again, what is more important for me, or what I used it for initially, was the benchmark command. So that was important for me. But for you, and you are looking to stand up a Flux node to get a quick glance around which CPUs would be supported and which would not, there are the various different threads here depending on the node that you would like. So if I just quickly jump to Cumulus as an example, here you'll be able to see some of the CPUs and their events per second and thread scores that they've managed to achieve. So you can quickly identify, CPUs that would meet the requirement and CPUs that wouldn't across the various different nodes. So I find this quite helpful, that I wouldn't stand up a node that I already know that wouldn't meet the specific requirement. So that's quite useful. Now, if you don't want to build your own computer or use one of the computers that you've got at home, the other option is VPSs, as I mentioned earlier. Now, for that, there's again another Google Sheet that Flux has got available. Let me show you what that looks like. In here, you would be able to find a list of providers from Flux, what the type and definition of the provider, where it's located, and the cost, and then the links to it. So for the various different nodes, these are just options that Flux is providing for you to at least explore. Obviously, you will need to go and have a look at what works better. There might be a local provider that's even cheaper than this, but this is a good guideline to do some price hunting at least. And similar to the CPU benchmarks, what is nice is they've got the various different tiers here and what the proposed costs are. So I think this is quite useful for people that want to use the VPS option. So now that we know the dates, the specifications, some of the various different options, the next logical question and the elephant in the room is, how much money can I expect to make from standing up a Flux node? And to help that discussion a little bit, let's have a look at the current baseline. And for that, I'm just going to go to the official Flux OS dashboard. And this dashboard, anybody can go to. I'll leave a link in the video description. But this is exactly what the earnings is at this specific point in time, using the current structure and the current price of Flux. So as you can see, a Cumulus node at this specific point in time earns about $200, where a Nimbus node is about $486 and almost $2,000 for a Stratus node. Obviously, the VPS costs that are used here, and that's important to take note of, is also included based on today's specifications. So this obviously is going to change because the specifications has actually increased. So these are the important things that you need to set as a baseline. Now, the second thing that we can use to come up with a hypothetical scenario is actually two Excel sheets that has already been created. One by Flux and another by a Flux community member, Turbocharge. So let's first have a look at the official Flux one. So for that here, this is a nice little view of what the current reward structure is. So similar to that live view, here you can see how many Cumulus nodes there are today and what the amount is and the amount of Flux that you can earn today, right? So this is a snapshot of what the situation is today. So you can see there's about 1,273 Cumulus nodes. Now, what they have built in here, and if I go to the last sheet here, this is now where you can play with your hypothetical scenarios, right? So currently, as you probably would have seen, there's about 1,200 or a little bit short than 1,300 Flux nodes. So here you can put in what you think scenarios could be. So in my case, I think there's probably going to be 10,000 Cumulus nodes. Again, that's just what I'm thinking. And with that calculation, taking into account the current Flux rewards for Cumulus node, the amount of parallel assets, this is the amount of Flux that I can expect to earn. Again, this is not taking into account any VPSs or hardware or anything like that. This is just the amount of Flux that you can get. Now, the other caveat is these parallel assets, you would need to obviously claim them, and there's a fees for claiming. So I'm not super excited about taking this into account. I know it's obviously a reward, but there's obviously fees attached to this. So this is sort of the best case scenario in terms of the amount of Flux that you can earn a day. So it's just important to remember that there are fees around claiming these parallel assets. But what you can do now here is plot a couple of scenarios, right? So do you think there's going to be 5,000 Cumulus nodes? Then you can go and specify that there. And then similarly, if you're looking to stand up a Nimbus node and Stratus node, you can do the exact same thing. What I would caution and what I would advise is we can clearly see that there is a ratio previously, or there was a correlation between the amount of staked coins and the rewards, right? Now, what you would notice here is the ratios has significantly changed. So as you can see here, the previous ratios was about 2.5 between Cumulus and Nimbus, and then 4 from Nimbus to Stratus, right? So the big change is from Cumulus to Nimbus. It's now 12.5 ratio, right? So that already tells me that there would be a ratio difference on the amount of Flux, right? So I would see probably the same ratio around earnings. So that's just something to take into account of. Now, this is just the one sheet, and it doesn't take into account any VPSs or anything else, right? And that's now where the shared Excel sheet from Turbocharge is quite useful. Let me show you what that looks like. So in here, there's also different node structures that you can play with, but they've got the detailed calculation, or he's got the detailed calculation around, how the rewards are calculated. But what's most important is you can specify in a VPS cost, and then he has modeled different Cumulus node numbers and the price of Flux, and then the potential earnings. So this is quite useful. So you can quickly have a look at, okay, my VPS cost, I don't know, is $14 as this example, and I expect that there would be 6,000 Cumulus nodes. That means if the price of Flux moves to $2 in this example, I would earn $48 a month after taking my VPS costs into account. So this is a nice little sheet for you to model the amount of Flux nodes that stood up against the current and potentially future price of Flux. So this gives you at least a forecasted or view around
if the cumulus nodes increase, and then potentially the price of Flux, right? So, we obviously all hope that the price would increase, but here you can get a view around, at what amount and at what price Flux needs to be in order for it to be profitable to stand up a node. So this is definitely useful. In conclusion, nobody really knows how many Flux nodes are going to be stood up or what the price of Flux is going to be in the future. However, these are just some of the tools that I'm using for my decision-making purposes. I would encourage you to do your own research, but hopefully you would find some of this information helpful.
That's it for this video, guys. If you've liked it, please like the video, maybe consider subscribing to the channel. If you didn't, please specify in the comments what you would like me to change. Otherwise, I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.